Tens of thousands of Palestinians hold rallies to commemorate the 66th anniversary of Nakba Day. Russian President Vladimir Putin warns that natural gas deliveries to Ukraine will be halted unless Kiev pays up front. Thousands across Turkey stage protests after a mine disaster leaves over 280 people dead. And military operations against ISIS continue around the Iraqi city of Fallujah. Good evening and welcome to Al World News. I'm Mariam Khaddad. While Palestinians commemorated the Nakba, or the catastrophe, amid further tragedies, at least 2 people were killed by the Israeli occupation forces during rallies which flooded cities and towns across the occupied West Bank.
66 years on, and Palestinians have not forgotten their long journey home. Thousands of Palestinians in the occupied West Bank marched in remembrance of Nakba.
We are commemorating the 66th anniversary of Nakba in Palestine. Today, people from all of the cities, the villages, and the Palestinian refugee camps send a message to the world, saying that we are committed to our right and we have the right to choose our future. It is impossible to have peace without solving the core issue with the Zionist occupation, which is the refugee issue.
But just like on that fateful day, Palestinians were on the receiving end of further Israeli brutality. 2 Palestinians were killed and dozens wounded when the occupying forces opened fire on a demonstration outside Alfa prison on the outskirts of Ramallah. The protesters were demanding the release of thousands of detainees. Tear gas was used by the Israeli forces in the occupied city of Al-Quds to violently disperse another Nakba rally. Soon, clashes erupted after a number of people were detained. It was on May 15, 1948, under British rule, when some 750,000 Palestinians were forcefully driven out of their homes by Zionist extremists in order to establish a Jewish state. The creation of the Israeli entity wiped out a total of 500 villages and towns off the map of Palestine. Decades later, Palestinians still remember their ongoing humanitarian catastrophe.
They say that the old people die and the young will forget. On the contrary, we teach our children, even the unborn babies, we teach them that their land was stolen by the Zionists.
The forcible expulsion transformed Palestinians into the largest and longest standing refugee population in the world. By the end of 2013, an estimated 7.4 million out of the total of 11.2 million are displaced, while 4.7 million Palestinian refugees hope for an eventual return to their homeland.
We do not forget our land, and it does not matter how long it will take. We will return to our lands. All the refugees in Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, all the Arab countries, and everywhere, they should have the right to return.
Now, it has been 6 decades since this tragedy struck the Palestinians, but as has been the case every year, this occasion is used to pass the torch to the younger generation to carry on the struggle until their return home.
Meanwhile, commemorating the 66th anniversary of the Nakba, hundreds of Palestinians marched through the streets of the Gaza Strip, demanding the right of return to their lands, which continue to be occupied by the Israelis. Our Gaza correspondent Balsam Al-Atrash was at that rally and filed the following report.
Hundreds of Palestinians marched through the streets of the Gaza Strip today in demonstrations commemorating the 66th anniversary of the Nakba, or the catastrophe. The rally saw the participation of all factions for the first time since internal divisions in 2007. Participants raised Palestinian flags and banners. demanding the right of return to their land.
I'm from the great Yibna village in the occupied Palestinian land. I'm teaching my children and grandchildren that we have a right to return. I still have my key to my home in Yibna. I will return even after I die. My children shall return. It's our legitimate right. We shall return.
Nakba Day in 1948 marks the forced exile of over 750,000 Palestinians from their homes. Some were subjected to brutal massacres. Many fled for fear of their lives. A few managed to stay in what would become the Israeli entity. 66 years later, Palestinians continue to suffer. The Nakba, according to many, is a story of fear and intimidation, denial and persecution, a cruel and unending reality.
66 years have passed since Nakba and the formation of the Zionist usurper entity on our Palestinian land in the midst of Islamic and Arab countries. We Palestinians and members of the Islamic Jihad movement reconfirm our devotion to Palestine, all Palestine, and our legitimate right to return. We stress that this Zionist entity is illegal and Palestine is for its people, where we will not spare any effort in continuing our resistance and jihad path until we return back Palestine and to the Islamic and Arab world.
Palestinians have stressed that national struggle and resistance in all its forms will continue to call for the right of return, self-determination, and the establishment of an independent Palestinian state with its capital, Al-Quds. Palestinians say they will continue to demand the international community to take responsibility in removing the historical injustice committed against their people at the hands of the Israelis, as well as enable refugees to return to their homes, which they were forced from back in 1948.
Yes, we are here today, the Palestinian youth, children and elders, to confirm that what crimes and massacres the Zionists have committed against us, we will not give up our rights. Even when they forced us to leave our homes and lands, we are holding on to our right to return.
Judging by turnout today, it appears that Palestinians, even after 66 years, have not and will not forget their homeland and legitimate right of return, despite the Israelis' ongoing attempts to erase Nakba from history. Balsam Al-Atrash, Littijah TV, Gaza.
Political analyst Suhail Al-Natur earlier gave us some further insight into the commemoration of this tragic event, which remains embedded in the minds of the Palestinians.
The main cause of the tragedy of the Palestinians is the Israeli occupation. As far as the occupation is still continuing, the Nakba will never be forgotten. In 1948, Ben Gurion, who was the prime minister of the new Israeli state, said that the first generation after a few years will die and the other generations will forget. It seems that they made everything based on this account, but this account failed. On the contrary, we began obligatory to be scattered all over the world. A small part of us stayed in the land of Palestine, and the majority were scattered in Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and some in Egypt. Those who were in Palestine approximately were estimated to 120,000 Palestinians. Now they are more than 125,000 Palestinians. 3 days ago, the anniversary day of the Palestinians, by the account of the Israelis, it was an occasion to gather 10,000 Palestinians in a small village called Lubi, for the first time inside the so-called Israel, near Tiberias, and hissing the PLO and the Palestinian flag. They were saying that we are an integral part of the Palestinian people and we want our brothers to return. The right to return is very symbolic of the capacity of the Palestinians to continue to resist and to be robust all attempts of neglecting the Palestinian cause. We hope that they are going to continue to be on working on all levels of capacity and struggle. Our generation was thinking about what was left or ceded by the force of the enemy. We have to get it by our force against the enemy. Now, the interpretation of force is not only by carrying weapons. This is a main thing to carry operations and military attacks against the Israeli military positions. But also the struggle of the branches of the people and the classes of the people is very important. Boycott the Israeli goods is one of the things. Impose on the Arab regimes not to make any naturalization of relations with the enemy is something. So the future relation go in the education to be in a higher place and to create a lot of capacities to be serving the attempts to return home and to liberate Palestine in order to have one day the capacity of self-determination.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has threatened to cut off gas to Ukraine, that is, unless Kiev pays for it in advance. However, Putin said that Moscow remains open to discussions over Ukraine's gas debt and accused the European Union of failing to make, quote, specific proposals to prevent the halting of energy supplies as of June 1st. While British Foreign Secretary William Hague and his U.S. counterpart John Kerry called on Russia to allow for Ukraine to hold presidential elections peacefully, during a press conference in London, both leaders warned Moscow of further sanctions if Russia doesn't respect the May 25th vote.
We all agreed to continue preparations for these sanctions, while of course urging Russia to stop any actions that prevent the elections going ahead peacefully.
We call on the separatists and Russians to respect this election process, to help to make it happen even, to encourage Ukrainians to be able to define their future. That's the best way to de-escalate this situation.
Meanwhile, self-defense forces in the recently seceded city of Donetsk have issued a 24-hour ultimatum to Ukrainian troops to retreat before their siege of the region is broken by force.
The eastern regions of Donetsk and Luhansk have emancipated from Kiev. However, the Ukrainian siege on the regions remains in place, leaving self-defense forces no other option but to give troops a 24-hour ultimatum to withdraw from their posts. In the event of the Ukrainian army's refusal to retreat, pro-Russian activists have said they will compel their armored vehicles to pull back and to remove the roadblocks they have set up. This comes after an independence referendum in Donetsk and Luhansk showed that the majority of the residents support self-rule. Donetsk has even asked Moscow to permit its accession into the Russian Federation. However, the Russian Foreign Ministry has denied receiving a formal request from separatists to integrate the region into Russia. 700 kilometers away, preparations for Ukraine's presidential elections are underway in Kiev. Authorities have begun printing the ballots for the vote, which the pro-Russian eastern regions are set to boycott. Now the clock is ticking, and as the 24-hour ultimatum inches closer, it remains to be seen whether the situation in eastern Ukraine will go up in flames or settle into a cautious calm.
Well, amid the rising tension in eastern Ukraine, the interim government in Kiev claims to have uncovered the mastermind fueling the unrest. Colonel Igor Strelkov, known by three names, is believed to be the commander-in-chief of the Donetsk People's Republic, but who he actually works with is still a topic of debate.
Whether this man's name is Colonel Igor Strelkov, Igor Gherkin, or Strelok. To the Ukrainian intelligence, he's just one man, wanted for being what they claim is the top Russian intelligence operative in the separatist East. These days he moves through the streets in a black Mercedes, his face hidden behind tinted windows, his aim to protect the eastern regions from the ongoing offensive by forces loyal to Kiev. He's rarely seen in public, and anti-Kiev protesters rarely speak about his identity. His neighbors in a Moscow suburb where he is believed to have resided for years know him as a quiet man named Igor Gherkin. To his fighters in the besieged city of Slavyansk, he is known by a shorter and deadlier name, Strelok, or the shooter. His leaflet, published on the website of a separatist politician, Pavel Gubarev, on Monday, was issued in the name of the commander-in-chief of the Donetsk People's Republic. Last month, an interview with the mystery man was apparently posted online. In the video, Strelkov said he came from Crimea and that most of his fighters were veterans of the Russian or Ukrainian armies with battlefield experience. Their weapons were all seized from arsenals in Ukraine.
We don't want to move ahead with this. We don't want to shoot our brothers. But if the escalation continues, we will act in a different way. I'm a realist. Russia didn't provide us any guns or ammunition since the beginning at all. All has been presented by the Ukrainian soldiers and police officers. Ukraine is a failed state, which almost only brainwashes its own citizens.
But the interim government in Kiev, along with its Western backers, claim that Strelkov is an agent of Russia's main intelligence directorate. In other words, they believe it is proof that Moscow is behind the uprising in eastern Ukraine despite its denials. Without a full identity, not even a date of birth or place, Strelkov still made it on the European Union's sanction list on April 29th. And while Kiev and its allies use the opportunity to claim that they have uncovered the link between Moscow and the uprising in the east, the identity of Strelkov remains vague. Whether such men are only sympathizers of the anti-Kiev protesters in eastern Ukraine or something more remains to be determined. What is clear is that the faces of the men behind the masks reveal a determined and an elusive group of individuals.
Let's get some more information on these latest developments in Ukraine with Sarah Davis, a journalist based in Kiev. Let's start with the natural gas issue. What would be the implications if Russia does turn off the gas taps?
Very serious implications. Everybody, again, will have, it's a gas war like they had in 2006 and 2009. They've been through this before, and it will affect Europe as well, because Ukraine may tap into gas that's going over to Europe to survive through a very, very harsh winters to come, the winter to come. The summer obviously is not a major issue, but yes, it would be very severe on Ukraine if Russia
Let's just elaborate. How would such a move affect other European countries, for example, Germany?
Well, 15% of Russian gas goes through Ukraine, so it will affect it will affect the other countries if Ukraine taps into the gas that's supposed to be for the other European countries. Obviously, it did that before in past gas wars with Russia. So, yeah, it can affect Germany and other countries in Europe.
So what do you make of Prime Minister Arseniy Yatsenyuk's claim that his government would take Russia to court if, unless it agrees to a gas supply contract based on market prices?
I think that they have a point there, that Russia has hiked up the price. They've doubled the price since this government has been in power. And they've done this before when Yulia Tymoshenko was prime minister. So again, the Kiev think as well, the Kiev government at the moment feel like they've got European support and that the Europeans are going to back them as well, maybe give them more money to bail them out. Whether or not they do is another matter. I think they're becoming a bit more assertive against Russia, against these gas wars that they have with Russia. So it remains to be seen what actually will happen. And June 3rd is the day when they're saying Russia has given a deadline. June 3rd, Ukraine has to pay its gas bill that they've already received. This is gas that Ukraine's already received by June 3rd.
So how much of the IMF's $17 billion bailout will go to Russia?
Probably a lot of it, if it's to do with the gas, because Ukraine owes a lot of gas at the moment. It's in the billions. So yeah, the bailout would definitely go towards paying off Russian gas, as well as other things. I mean, Ukraine has massive debt, so it's not financially stable at the moment. It's actually veering towards a real collapse in the economy due to all the struggles that they have been experiencing over the last year. So yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see what actually will happen. It seems like as we near closer to these elections, tensions, everything is about to explode, it looks like. In the east, with Russian gas, it's all coming to a head right before the elections.
Now, what is the significance of this ultimatum in Donetsk for Ukrainian troops to leave within 24 hours, given that it comes only days after the region seceded from Kiev?
It's very significant as well. It shows that the rebels in the east are not giving up. They're very determined to push back the Ukrainian army. They feel that that is their territory now. They have the right to control those areas. And the Ukrainians, the interim government itself feels that they have the right to secure these areas. It's Ukrainian land, and they don't recognize these referendums. So things could come to a head very quickly, especially, they've given this deadline of 24 hours. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen. And on top of that, there are also militant groups forming that have nothing to do with the Ukrainian army, like civilian groups forming in other regions in the east and in southeast. Dnipropetrovsk, for example, has a battalion that's made up of civilian groups that are pro-Ukrainian. Some people say they may be being funded by the governor there, who's pro-Ukrainian, of the Dnipropetrovsk city. He's also a massive, rich oligarch. However, so things could come to a head between all these rebel groups and the military that's in the regions at the moment, and also the Russian military, which is still on the border. So it's really very, very tense at the moment in those areas.
So how do you think the Ukrainian authorities will respond? Is an escalation in violence imminent?
I'm afraid it might be. I'm afraid that could be the result. They haven't withdrawn the military in those areas yet. They look like they will not withdraw. They've said that this anti-terrorist operation is going ahead until they've secured these areas. And on top of that, they have all this support from, ultra-nationalists and different rebel groups, which they do not control. So even if the military did pull back, these rebel groups that are pro-nationalists may not agree with the Ukrainian government and say, no, we're not going to pull back, we're going to fight. So it looks like clashes are a realistic future thing that might happen. It's very realistic.
All right, Sarah Davis, thank you very much for joining us.
Okay, thank you.
A one-day general strike was launched on the first day of national mourning that marks the worst mining disaster in Turkey's history. Police forces clashed with protesters who have accused the government of negligence and murder.
It is the first day of a national mourning that has overwhelmed Turkey with a mix of anguish and fury. A massive grave was being dug for the hundreds of victims who lost their lives while serving at the Soma coal mine. A mass funeral has also been held for those whose bodies were recovered, while dozens of their colleagues remain trapped under the rubble. The president and the energy minister made a visit to the disaster site as trade unions launched a general strike to protest against the government's decision to privatize the mining sector, a move they say has forced miners to endure tough working conditions. Public anger has continued to mount across the country. In Ankara and Istanbul, police fired tear gas and water cannons to disperse the thousands stronger crowd. Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan himself had a taste of the fury. As he arrived to the site of the catastrophe, his car was kicked before he was heckled and jeered. One of his bodyguards was pictured kicking one of the protesters, while his own response was just as aggressive. Erdogan's interpretation of the events drew even further criticism.
Such mine accidents do not only happen in Turkey. It also happens in many countries such as the United States, China, France, India and Belgium. I give, for example, figures for death tolls. Many people died in such coal mine accidents. Our country is in a much better position.
This, as new reports reveal that Erdogan's cabinet rejected a proposal to look into an alarming death rate at similar plants in the town. Former workers agree that the tragedy was a result of negligence, leading many to accuse the government of an unforgivable crime.
At least 22 people were killed and several others were wounded in a wave of attacks and bombings across Iraq. Several bombings hit the capital Baghdad. 10 people were killed in twin suicide bombings in the commercial district of Karada. The other bombing hit Sadr city in eastern Baghdad, killing at least 7 more people. 5 soldiers were also attacked by gunmen in the western province of Anbar. Meanwhile, the Iraqi army has intensified its shelling of Fallujah in the western Anbar province in preparation for the ground assault to regain control of the city, which has been under al-Qaeda militant control for over 5 months.
It's now only a matter of time before these extremist militants' rule comes to an end, as the operation aimed at eliminating al-Qaeda insurgents in Iraq's northern city of Fallujah continues. Iraqi military forces renewed their shelling of Fallujah on Thursday morning, in preparation for a ground assault to reclaim the city, located in Iraq's western Anbar province. At least 12 militants from al-Qaeda affiliate the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant were reportedly killed this morning, in clashes with members of the Iraqi army and tribesmen. Tribesmen and the army have been working together to counter the al-Qaeda insurgents. This comes as government forces are reportedly stationed 5 minutes from Fallujah, awaiting the green light from Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki to launch their operation. The government has delivered an ultimatum to anyone still inside the city, to leave or to be treated as a supporter of al-Qaeda. The ultimatum coincided with Iraqi officials warning militants that government forces were preparing for a major attack in Fallujah, and that the city should wait for what is coming, a reference to the impending major assault.
A car bomb blast killed at least 43 civilians and wounded dozens more on the Syrian side of the Bab al-Salama border crossing with Turkey. According to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, women and children were among the dead in an area used as a car park. The area around the crossing has been targeted by car bombs before. In February, a blast on the Syrian side killed 6 people and wounded 45. The so-called Friends of Syria group vowed to ramp up support for what they called moderate opposition groups during a gathering in London. While 11 Western and Arab states said they would try to funnel more aid to desperate Syrians, they criticized the Syrian government's plans to press ahead with presidential elections on June 3rd.
We've also agreed unanimously to take further steps together through a coordinated strategy to increase our support for the moderate opposition national coalition and for its Supreme Military Council and associated moderate armed groups.
We are unified in saying that Assad's staged elections are a farce, they're an insult, they are a fraud on democracy, on the Syrian people, and on the world.
You're watching Al-Attijah World News, coming up after the break. Michelle Obama's campaign supporting the abducted Nigerian schoolgirls fuels an anti-drone campaign. We'll explain after the break. Welcome back. Our top stories this hour. Tens of thousands of Palestinians hold rallies to commemorate the 66th anniversary of a Nakba Day. Russian President Vladimir Putin warns that natural gas deliveries to Ukraine will be halted unless Kiev pays up front. Thousands across Turkey stage protests after a mine disaster leaves at least over 280 people dead. And military operations against ISIS continue around the Iraqi city of Fallujah. Egyptian expatriates are casting their ballots in more than 100 countries for Egypt's next head of state. The vote comes only 11 days before presidential elections kick off in the Arab world's most populous country. Ahead of the May 26th vote, Egypt's frontrunner, ex-army chief Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, held his first interview with an international news organization. He addressed a range of issues, including Egypt's ailing economy, the crackdown against the Muslim Brotherhood, and terrorism.
Our approach during this period of time is to provide job opportunities for the Egyptians, is to control minimum and maximum wages. Minimum wages are very modest, barely sufficient to provide an appropriate standard of living. There are also subsidies that are offered by the Egyptian state. We need to address them so that they can be distributed fairly. The Muslim Brotherhood lost their connection with the Egyptians, and they lost the sympathy of the Egyptians, most Egyptians. The unjustified violence that they have directed against Egyptians has not only lost them all sympathy, but also lost them the opportunity to truly reconcile with society. We have to be careful about the spread of the map of terrorism in the area, and I believe that there is a role for the West in this. They did not complete their mission in Libya. All of the weapons that are spread out everywhere should have been collected so that the state could be stable and there could be a country.
Okay.
It's been less than a year since a military-backed coup ousted the first democratically elected Egyptian president, Mohamed Morsi. Now it seems that the Egyptians are having their second attempt at democracy. With 11 days to go before the country holds its presidential elections, expatriates lined up in front of Egyptian embassies and consulates in more than 100 countries to cast their ballots. Although there are only 600,000 registered Egyptian expatriate voters, a high turnout was witnessed in countries like Australia, the United Arab Emirates and Jordan.
Every one of these Egyptian citizens is here to vote for the future of Egypt and to have their say in the country's future. I hope that these elections will put Egypt on the right path.
Ex-army chief and leading presidential candidate Abdel Fattah el-Sisi is widely expected to win. Sisi, the man who led the July 3rd overthrow of Islamist President Mohamed Morsi, has capitalized on nationalistic and anti-Muslim Brotherhood sentiment.
I love my country and my own people. I wanted to serve them to ensure democracy, freedom, rule of law, and a better lifestyle.
His only rival is leftist leader Hamdin Sabahi. He has the support of youth groups who led the 2011 uprising against autocrat Hosni Mubarak. For his part, Sabahi has vowed to end the political polarization that has crippled Egypt. Some regional experts, however, believe these elections are a mere farce, orchestrated to install another military regime under Sisi, not very different than the one that ruled Egypt for decades.
Well, in the latest blow to Egypt's cash-strapped interim government, the United Arab Emirates said it has no plan for providing additional financial aid to Cairo. The UAE has been a major supporter of Egypt since President Mohamed Morsi was ousted in July of 2013. Other Persian Gulf states, including Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, have poured billions of dollars to prop up the country's ailing economy. Omar Ismail, a political analyst in London, joins us now via Skype to elaborate on Egypt's upcoming presidential elections. Mr. Ismail, given the high expatriate voter turnout, does this signify that people have not given up on democracy in Egypt?
I don't think the Egyptians have ever actually given up on the democracy and the rule of law. And I think the Egyptian outside, particularly in European and democratic countries, will want to see a democratic system in Egypt where everybody is equal in front of the law and everybody is enjoying the fruit of a successful economy and a successful country. So I'm not at all surprised that there is a long queues in front of the different embassies and consulates all over the world.
Well, it's ironic that this presidential poll is widely expected to restore elected rule to Egypt when Sisi led the ouster of their first freely elected president. So how does this give him democratic credentials?
Sorry, I missed the first part of your question.
I said that it was ironic that the presidential poll is widely expected to restore elected rule to Egypt when Sisi led the ouster of their first freely elected president.
I did expect that question, but I didn't expect it right now. It's quite understandable what happened in Egypt. And I think if we're going to apply academic rules in how on the dynamism of people and on masses when a revolution happens, then the Egyptians have actually proved that these academic rules are not really correct in some cases. The Egyptians were faced with either a similar situation to what's happening in Syria, if the army has not intervened. And the Egyptians went out in their masses on the 30th of June, demanding the removal of Morsi and demanding the removal of the Muslim Brotherhood in particular, and also demanding that the army support them in their endeavor. So I wouldn't call it a coup. I am with you that we might not be able to call it a revolution either, but the status quo could not have happened in Egypt if the army did not intervene at that time. Then we would have been witnessing now killing and terrorism on a large scale in Egypt, because the Muslim Brotherhood had their militia ready and their supporters from elsewhere in the Arab countries, Syria, Libya, Gaza, and also Sudan. So, I don't think the army could have stood by and watched this happen.
Well, is the crackdown on Morsi's Muslim Brotherhood movement likely to intensify in the lead-up to those polls?
Well, the Muslim Brotherhood now is a banned organization. It cannot actually speak on behalf of the Egyptian. It does not speak on behalf of even the majority of Muslim Brotherhood. They are in disarray. They cannot represent themselves adequately. They have a forked tongue. They spread rumors and messages which is untrue in the West, and yet in Egypt they use the other weapons of fear and killing innocent people. So I'm not quite sure what else can a state do to defend itself. I think the army, whether it was Sisi or somebody else, would have taken a position to protect the state from disintegration and protect the Egyptian people from a worse fate than what happened in Rabaa al-Adawiyya and other places where the Muslim Brotherhood was gathering. So, I think the history will prove at time in a proper manner that what happened in Egypt was a call from the people of Egypt to protect their 7,000 years civilization and to protect the state from disintegration.
All right, Mr. Omar Ismail, a political analyst, thanks a lot for joining us.
Thank you.
Negotiations between Iran and the P5+1 group of nations over Tehran's nuclear program have entered their second day in the Austrian capital, Vienna, as the two sides seek to hammer out a permanent accord before the July 20th deadline.
It's the same shot of the two negotiating sides all over again. EU Foreign Policy Chief Catherine Ashton to the left and Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif to the right, with the usual grin on his face and a whole lot of diplomatic tricks up his sleeve. Negotiations over Tehran's nuclear program remain underway in Vienna, with representatives from Iran and the P5+1 attempting to draft the text for a permanent accord before a looming July deadline. The Islamic Republic and 6 Western powers are striving to make the 4th round of nuclear talks, since the interim deal reached last November in Geneva, work in their favor. Thorny issues, such as Iran's uranium enrichment levels, its nuclear facilities, and the timeline of sanctions relief before July 20th, are expected to be resolved in line with the agreement. A comprehensive deal between the two sides will see Western-imposed sanctions against the Islamic Republic lifted in exchange for scaling down its nuclear activities. Despite the complexity of the talks, both Iran and the West have been trying to overcome their differences by making all-out efforts to put an end to the decade-long dispute over Tehran's peaceful nuclear program.
In line with the Iranian government's efforts to manufacture medicine domestically, the first International Pediatric Oncology Congress kicked off in the Islamic Republic. Our correspondent Hussein Dabash has more for us from that event.
The first International Pediatric Oncology Congress has kicked off in the Iranian capital Tehran. Medical specialists from over a dozen countries, including the US, Germany, and France, were present at the opening of the 3-day event. The Congress seeks to combine the knowledge of the organizations involved in the event in a bid to improve the methods used to treat children with cancer. The conference also honors the lifelong achievements of the late Professor Parvana Vasug, the pioneer of pediatric hematology oncology in Iran.
Well, these political differences really don't matter, because the diseases are alike all over the world and the children are alike. So these networks have been established by knowing each other. The head of my former department worked together with Professor Alebouye when Professor Alebouye was young and stayed in Germany. So that's how it works. And then by knowing personally, you build up formal networks by scientific societies, by regular meetings, but that of course requires traveling and free borders.
The event was organized by Mahak, a non-governmental charity group set up to support children diagnosed with cancer.
Non-governmental and non-political and non-for-profit organization. For this reason, we don't have any governmental budget and any trading, and all of our budget comes from public donation. At now, Mahak have the ranking 10 between 265 non-governmental organizations in the world, according to benchmark systems of Société Générale de Surveillance SGS company.
The organization that sponsored this event takes care of 20,000 child patients. Recently, the government of Iran has urged the country's pharmaceutical companies to intensify their efforts in manufacturing indigenous-made medicines to provide all those suffering from cancer with affordable care. For the time being, government subsidies have made it easy to purchase foreign medication for those in need. This conference is part of a larger campaign by the Islamic Republic to bring the medical world together. Tehran wants to show the world that despite international sanctions imposed on it, it is pioneering in different industries, including the medical one. Reporting for AEE TV, Hussein Dabash, Tehran.
U.S. Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel claimed that he is not aware of any facts that would validate a recent report of Israeli spying on his country. Hagel's statement was made during a press conference with Israeli War Minister Moshe Yaalon in Tel Aviv, who said that he would not allow any spying on the United States. A recent report was conducted earlier this month by former congressional aides and CIA employees, stating that Israelis have been spying on the United States for decades.
I have heard of that report. I'm not aware of any facts that would substantiate that report.
I just want to support your answer, Chuck. As a former head of the intelligence, I wasn't allowed to spy in the United States whatsoever. As a defense minister, I don't allow to spy in the United States whatsoever.
Warring sides in South Sudan have continued to trade blame over the collapse of a ceasefire deal as the civil war enters its 5th month amid warnings of famine and genocide.
War-torn South Sudan faces a catastrophic tipping point amid famine and genocide warnings as the conflict enters its 5th month with no sign of bloodshed ending. We face a mammoth task of getting massive levels of aid to people at the worst time of the year, when rains make many areas hard to reach and turn roads into rivers of mud. We either act now or millions will pay the price. According to the UN, more than a third of South Sudan's population, 3.7 million people, is facing emergency and crisis levels of hunger. In the war-torn Unity State, the key oil-producing region, more than 3/4 need aid. An Amnesty International report released last week described civilians, including children, executed by the side of the road like sheep, gang rapes of women using sticks, and other victims grotesquely mutilated with their lips sliced off. President Salva Kiir and rebel chief Riek Machar signed a fresh ceasefire agreement last week, but fighting broke out hours later, the second time in the 5th-month conflict that a truce has failed to hold. The ceasefire deal, signed last week in the Ethiopian capital Addis Ababa, was the result of weeks of mounting international pressure and shuttle diplomacy, but fighters on the ground appear to have paid little notice to it. Despite pressure to end the fighting, many fear that political leaders can no longer hold back their warring forces, as communities spiral into cycles of revenge attacks.
Nigeria's militant group Boko Haram has come under the global spotlight after its members abducted over 200 schoolgirls last month. Michelle Obama played a big role in promoting the new infamous hashtag #BringBackOurGirls campaign. But as Caitlin Hamadi explains, the involvement of the First Lady has paved the way for the creation of an anti-drone campaign.
And I want you to know that Barack has directed our government to do everything possible to support the Nigerian government's efforts to find these girls and bring them home. In these girls, Barack and I see our own daughters. We see their hopes and their dreams. And we can only imagine the anguish their parents are feeling right now.
America's First Lady, Michelle Obama, made an emotional plea to promote the now infamous hashtag #BringBackOurGirls campaign, which went viral following the abduction of more than 200 Nigerian schoolgirls on April 14th by the militant group Boko Haram. But while some praised her for getting involved, others quickly subverted her message, directing it towards an issue that does not get a lot of media coverage, especially in the U.S. A backlash of criticism in the form of tweets revolving around anti-drone protests was created, with a hashtag #WeCan'tBringBackOurDead gaining quite a bit of traction online. The new tweets and Instagram pictures compare the terrorist activities of the militant group Boko Haram to U.S. drone strikes ordered by the First Lady's husband, Barack Obama himself. And while the family occupying the White House seems to have been shook up by the abducted Nigerian schoolgirls, there has been little concern over the thousands of deaths resulting from U.S. drone strikes. Drone strikes are said to be the president's personal choice of warfare.
Dozens of highly skilled al-Qaeda commanders, trainers, bomb makers, and operatives have been taken off the battlefield.
Under Obama's watch, the drone warfare campaign in Pakistan alone has expanded by 8 times since predecessor George W. Bush left office. In his first 5 years as president, more than 2,400 people were killed in 390 drone strikes. Aside from Pakistan and the 2-decade-long war fronts in Iraq and Afghanistan, Obama expanded Predator drone strikes regularly in Somalia and Yemen as well. So while another family mourns for its deceased child, half a world away, somewhere in the U.S., the military drone pilot sits in a safe, quiet room, manipulating buttons on a computer to launch missile strikes from his faraway piloted drone aimed at his next kill.
You've tuned into Al World News. Let's recap our headlines. Tens of thousands of Palestinians hold rallies to commemorate the 66th anniversary of Nakba Day. Russian President Vladimir Putin warns that natural gas deliveries to Ukraine will be halted unless Kiev pays up front. Thousands across Turkey stage protests after a mine disaster leaves over 280 people dead. And military operations against ISIS continue around the Iraqi city of Fallujah. That's all for this bulletin. Have a good night.